Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Heidi and I do a bunch of bookish content. We are officially 1 month into 2025, so it is time for the first reading wrap up of the year. Please subscribe and don't forget to like this video. I post bookish content every single week, book challenges, TBR, wrap ups, the whole thing. So hope to see you around, and please comment below your February TBR reads or any of your favorite January reads. I get some fantastic book recommendations in my YouTube comments, and it has been a really fun way to connect with my viewers. So if you have any book recommendations or books that you got to in January or want to get to in February that you want to share, please drop them below. But without further ado, let's get into January's reading wrap up. Going into 2025, I set a pretty big reading goal for myself, which was 100 books. It's the first time I've ever done that. I got pretty close to it last year, but I knew that in order to hit that goal, I'd have to start off 2025 a lot stronger than I did 2024. While January was still a much better reading month than January of 2024, I still did not get around to reading as many books as I had hoped. I'll just start off by saying my January TBR was 4 books from my TBR jar, and then another 2 books from my 25 and 2025 list that I wanted to hit. Of those 6 books that I had outlined, I read one of them and I started one other. Part of this was because all of these books that I had outlined for my January TBR are on my physical shelf, and I spent a good chunk of January traveling where I couldn't bring all of the physical books that I wanted just due to carry-on space. So I did read on my Kindle, and I did a lot of audiobooks this month, a lot being 2, but I didn't get around to reading as much of my physical TBR as I had wanted. So in total, I read 6 books, 2 of those being audiobooks, and started 2 others. I just didn't finish them in January. I have finished or almost finished them now. It's currently the first day of February. So not bad. I definitely think February is going to be a much more successful reading month. Honestly, I just don't have anything planned. So all of my downtime, I prefer to read in my downtime anyways. So I just think February is going to be a great reading month. I have already posted my February TBR picks, so if you want to go check that out, got some really great reads on there. But let's jump into what I read in January. For starters, I want to go over the books that I began but didn't get to finish in January. I am doing my Throne of Glass reread this year, and I will be posting a part 1 and a part 2 of my reread experience. If you have not read Throne of Glass, it will have spoilers, so just keep that in mind. But if you have read this series and you want to go check that out, I plan to be posting that within the next month or so. I am buddy reading, so I'm kind of trying to pace it out. I'm having a great time with this reread. I've honestly just been like super diligent about tabbing it up and annotating. I have a whole key as well, which I'll be going over in that video. But overall, I started Assassin's Blade in January, finished it today actually. So having a lot of fun with this one. And then on my January 25 and 2025 picks, one of them was Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home. I will say, I was not a Magnolia Parks fan in book 1. I enjoyed Daisy Hates a lot more, but Magnolia and BJ, I was just having a hard time getting on the train. This book, I am about halfway done now, started at end of January. I think I'm starting to understand the hype around this series and these particular characters. I was having a hard time connecting to Magnolia and BJ. Obviously, they live a completely different lifestyle than most of us, which is fair. Overall, the toxicity was really, really hard for me to get behind, and I want characters that I can support somehow. I was having a hard time supporting these characters in book 1. However, you learn a lot about their history and backstory in the very beginning of The Long Way Home. Honestly, I'm having a great time. I am annotating this one. I just haven't added any tabs yet, so that's why this one's not as pretty as the others, but I am super excited to finish this one. It will be on my February wrap up. So if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on this, please stay tuned. I also did 2 audiobooks this month. The first one was Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I really, really enjoyed this one. To be honest with you, I don't think I would have enjoyed it had it not been an audiobook. It's narrated by Meryl Streep. It's automatically superior to almost every single audiobook out there. Meryl Streep is just, I mean, she is an acting goddess already, but she has a voice for radio and audiobooks where she just really is able to embody the characters without you even seeing her. So she really brought Tom Lake to life for me. I had a great time with this book, partially because it centers around a play called Our Town. Our Town is a play that I actually was in high school and played one of the main characters that recurs throughout the audiobook. So it was really, really great to experience that and like kind of get some flashbacks back to those core memories that I made. I had a great time in theater. I haven't done it in a while, but it just was very nostalgic. The book also centers around a mother and her 3 daughters and her relationship with them. She basically is telling the story of her life to her adult daughters. It's also a beautiful read because it's set during COVID. We're just kind of like re-exploring what it is to be around family at that time. I did give this book a 4.75. I really, really enjoyed it. It had some heavy topics. I think that the characters and the struggles that they went through and some of like just the youthful ignorance that they experienced was all very, very realistic in my opinion. There were a couple things that brought it down to a 4.75 when I think it would have been a 5-star, and that's just because I felt it had a very slow start. It took me a while to get into. I have a feeling I probably would have DNF'd it had I been reading it, but Meryl Streep really helped me like push through the beginning, and then I finished it in a couple days. While there are romantic undertones to it, I felt that the main motif was centered around family and then also coming of age and finding yourself as a woman. She grew up before the 2000s. You get to experience what life was like for her then and then how she's able to support her daughters through a modern global crisis like COVID. And obviously her daughter's experience growing up is a lot different from her experience growing up. There are conversations around, is it worth having a family in this day and age? The value of family. You kind of have this push and pull between generations that goes between this dual timeline. I loved it. It's definitely one I think I would listen to again, but this is also one I would recommend the audiobook over the actual book. Normally I don't do that, but it's Meryl Streep, so it's just fantastic already. The other audiobook that I did in January was Parable of the Sower, which I gave a 4.5. This book came out of left field for me. It was just, I had ran out of Audible credits and it was on the free library and I had heard of it a long time ago. All I remember was that this person said it's dark, but it's good. And so I just clicked play and I started listening. I didn't read the synopsis. I didn't read the summary. This book was wild in the most unexpected way. I literally don't know what I thought this book was going to be, but it was set in 2024, which was already crazy and relevant. But the main character lives in California, and California is basically perpetually on fire. The world is kind of like turning into anarchy. There really is no structure. Everybody's trying to escape California because there is no justice system. There is no active leading government. It's kind of just like every man for himself. It was a very intense read. This book was written in the mid 1990s, so to have it talk about things that were actually pretty relevant, all things considered, especially when it comes to the year and the fires and events in California. Not everything obviously was spot on, but it still hit close to home, especially not knowing what the book was about and going into it. I just was like, wow, this is kind of a surreal experience reading this book. I think that this book was getting pushed because the year and also the events, because I had never seen this book at a bookstore and all of a sudden it's on every Barnes & Noble table. It's on the free library on Audible. So I think maybe there was like a reason that I found it was because maybe it was like getting promoted a little bit more. I'm not quite sure. That might not be true, but I felt like I was just seeing it everywhere all of a sudden. It was really good. Definitely is one that I would check your trigger warnings for. Since it's an older book, they didn't list the trigger warnings, at least in the audiobook, but it was one, there were some things that happened I was not expecting. Obviously you go into it knowing it's a dystopian kind of sci-fi book. There are definitely Divergent, Hunger Games, even a little bit of like Dune. It was a very interesting read. All that considered, there were some topics and some scenes that were really intense. Just when you think it's over, it keeps going. It keeps getting worse. Some positive tropes that I found in this book were found family. Found family is a huge, huge part of this book. Survival as well. You actually will learn a thing or two by listening to or reading this book. Apparently, all these characters ate acorn bread, which was like a Literally every other page, acorn bread was brought up, which I don't know, does that actually sound good? I kind of think it does. Didn't know you could eat acorns, didn't know you can make it into bread. So hey, if the apocalypse happens, at least you have that and you'll survive. But anyways, it was a really interesting read. One I would recommend to the right audience, but I'm not quite sure if I'm going to finish the series. I think maybe they end up going to like outer space or something later in the series. It's basically her goal to create what I would call a cult. She basically creates this whole new religion in this book, and it's like her experience of founding this religion at a young age. This isn't a spoiler, by the way. She calls it Earthseed, is basically this like religion cult following. And so the whole book, yes, she's doing the whole found family thing, but she's also gaining followers for this religion. Very interesting, a little bit uncomfortable to read because you can see how in times of crisis, a cult can come into being and people don't think there's anything wrong with it. She didn't do anything wrong, but it was just a little bit eerie how easily she was able to manipulate people into following her as a young woman who really has like no political intrigue or experience. Very interesting, definitely a fantastic book for the right audience, but even if you are the target audience for this book, I recommend reading The Triggers. Okay, now we're gonna jump into the books that I read physically this month, and I just just want to point this out. How beautiful is that? That is just so satisfying. I'm really trying to make a goal this year to annotate as many books as I can and be more strategic about how I annotate. Normally I just do like one color for scenes that I like, but especially for books like Throne of Glass or maybe my book club reads, I'm trying to use multicolors to point out different themes or tropes or topics of conversation. So I started off January reading Legendary, which is the second book in the Caraval series. I did not think I was going to like Caraval. I generally don't read too much YA. I'm just more of a high fantasy reader. So when it comes to YA fantasy, sometimes it's not complex enough. And when it comes to YA romance, sometimes I'm just a little bit uncomfortable because I feel like the characters are too young for me to feel connected or not grimy reading about their love story, if that makes sense. Like I'm in my mid-20s, reading about like 16-year-olds falling in love is just like, it's not my thing. But for some reason, Caraval and Legendary, I really enjoyed. It was very unique. It felt like I was reading a book that Tim Burton wrote. I also think Stephanie Garber has a very beautiful way of describing scenery, and you can taste the food that she describes. You can feel the fabric of the dresses that the characters are wearing. So it's very immersive, and I definitely really enjoy how she writes. Sometimes I felt like this book was a little bit too long or like a scene was too drawn out, but it is very descriptive, and that's part of the reading experience for it. So if you enjoy that, if you enjoy just like being thrown into a book and like kind of forgetting that you're reading, I think Caraval and Legendary did that. I did rate this one 4.25 and I rated Caraval 4 stars flat. So I like this one more. I am going to be reading Finale in February, so hopefully wrapping up this series. This was a good time. I don't want to go too far into what this one was about if you haven't read Caraval, but basically the series focuses on these two sisters. Caraval is about one sister, and then Legendary is about the other sister and the adventures that they go on. The first Caraval book is basically set at the competition, carnival-like event. I don't really know how to explain it except like just imagine James and the Giant Peach, Tim Burton, like that'll give you the vibe. This one is set in the kingdom that is associated with this universe. So that was really fun. I liked that it was a change of scenery. I feel like going into this, if it had been the same setting, I might have actually been a little bit bored. I really liked the fact that it was in a kingdom, you meet the royal characters, and the cast grows, and you learn a little bit more about the backstory of what Caraval is and its leader. I am actually excited to be picking up Finale, and then we're going to be reading the Once Upon a Broken Heart series after that for our buddy read. Oh, why is Texas getting so hot? It's literally February. The next book that I read in February was Daydream. This was a 5-star read for me. This is part of the Maple Hills series. So if you've heard of Icebreaker or Wildfire by Hannah Grace, this is the third book in that collection. Now they are standalones in a universe that is connected. So while you don't have to read this third. I do recommend it only because the character dynamics build over time. So you're not really going to connect as much with the friendships that are within this book if you aren't familiar with them from book 1 and 2. However, all that being said, this was my absolute favorite bar none out of all of the books that she's written. I felt like this one was written very differently than the other ones. In the other 2 books, the characters have their own personal struggles, family struggles, all of that. But in this one, there were mental health struggles that these characters faced that I thought was much more complex than the other 2 books, but also I found this book so relatable. If you want a full review, I did post my full review, a no spoiler section first and then a spoiler section second, just talking about the character complexities here, the mental health conversations going on, the romance, the tropes, the friendships, the things I loved about this book and connected with, the audiences I think it targets, and then the spoiler section goes a little bit more in depth. But if you're interested in reading a book about like true found family, just a good time, not realistic friendships or conversations, but the friendships and conversations we all deserve to have with the people that we love in our lives. So if you are interested in that or interested in getting into the series, what I would say is don't go in expecting hyper realistic situations, hyper realistic people, hyper realistic dialogue. None of that is accurate in this. I definitely don't think boys talk to each other this way. I don't think there are any couples in the world who are as healthy as these couples are, and like just like anti-toxic. It is beautiful. It really makes you consider your friendships in your life, reconsider what you deserve out of your friendships. We're never gonna reach this level of perfection, but I think that part of what Hannah Grace is doing is basically showing us like we all deserve the best that we can get out of our friendships. We all deserve beautiful found family. Mailman's about to drop something in the mailbox. Yeah, there it is. This was a really, really great book for me to start off the year with. I resonated with these characters so much. We have Henry and Hallie. Hallie is what I would call a social introvert, which I relate to. She's a book girly. She's very studious. She is also kind of has that eldest daughter syndrome, people pleaser, can't say no to people, etc. And so she really struggles with that life balance for her and doing what she loves and not necessarily like people pleasing for people who don't deserve it. She has a really hard time saying no to people, and so she struggles with friendships. She feels like she can socialize with anybody, but also feels like she doesn't really belong anywhere. So she's kind of one of those people that we all know, or maybe we are, where you can fit in with any crowd, but you don't really feel like you belong to any particular friendship. That changes here. And then Henry is definitely an introvert who's forced into hyper social situations and has a hard time regulating himself and his emotions in those periods. And so Hallie is there to support him as he, he's just somebody who kind of needs to take time to process things and needs his quiet time to recharge. And I related to that very, very much. I wouldn't say I'm as introverted as Henry is, but the things he needs to do to recharge and recoup and just refine himself, I definitely related to that. And then Hallie, of course, is a book girly. I don't know, I just thought her backstory was very relatable as well. This is not a book I think everybody will enjoy, but the target audience will find this book very realistic. There are conversations had in this book that I think is very validating and acknowledges certain audiences that don't get as much attention. There are a lot of people out there who are not diagnosed with any kind of disorder, but they kind of live on the edge and maybe they feel like they don't fit in, but they don't know why they don't fit in. They don't know why they react a certain way. Do you know how many people are out there who kind of live on that boundary and never really understand why they never feel like they fit in or why they don't ever feel normal? That is these characters. And let me just say, there is no such thing as normal, but there are a lot of people out there who feel like they don't fit the normal stigma, and these characters are exactly like that, and their story is just so beautiful. They are friends first before all else. This was just a book that I felt very seen reading, and I know a lot of people who have read this that just felt like this was the type of book that this particular audience needed. So Hannah Grace did a great job doing that. You could tell she did a lot of research for this book. She really took her time reading this book. I think she even said in the acknowledgements she submitted this book late because she wanted it to be perfect, and I just really think she achieved that. So this was an easy 5-star read for me, and definitely one I will reread many more times to come. Following that, I read The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros. Rebecca Yarros did write Fourth Wing, so if the name sounds familiar, that's her. Yes, Fourth Wing is like her most popular series, but I personally think her romances and contemporary romances are really, really good. Completely different genres, obviously, but I do enjoy these books a lot. This was a book that I read with my Fable book club, so they are linked down below if you're interested in reading with us for February. Sneak peek, we're reading Funny Story by Emily Henry. It's gonna be great. So if you wanna join us, go ahead and click that link. We all really enjoyed this book. There was some mixed reviews. This was one that I personally felt was a 5-star read until 20 pages till the end. And then I bumped it down to a 3.75 star. Unfortunately, the ending came out of left field and not in a good way. I think it brought down the rating for me because the pacing felt off. The pacing of this book was excellent. Everything made sense. And then the ending felt like it was pulled out of nowhere, and then it was just like the end. Didn't understand it. I wasn't upset with how the book ended. I think the book the ending that it had was great. I wish it had happened 100 pages sooner so that we could kind of see like a slower resolution, or I wish that the book had been 50 pages longer so that when the kind of end scene happened, it was able to develop a little bit slower. But this book is about a single mom who is raising twins. She loses her brother on a mission across seas, and her brother's best friend is basically tasked to go back and take care of her. There's a lot more that goes into it than that, but I don't want to spoil anything. I did also do a full review, no spoiler and spoiler section on my YouTube, so if you're interested in hearing a deeper dive into this, I definitely recommend going in to check that out because I put a lot of thought into a no spoiler overview of it to make sure that you had everything that you needed to go into it without, you know, anything being ruined. I try really, really hard to not spoil anything about these books because I want you to have the best time reading it, but it can also mean that these recaps are a little bit more surface level and vague, and that's just because I don't want to be responsible for ruining it for anybody. But what I will tell you is I definitely think that this book is worth a read. The ending, you'll see it. It might come out of like left field and be a little bit fast, but overall the book was really, really good. The journey, the romance, the characters, the children in this book are absolutely precious. I love books with children in them. The banter between kids and adults just cracks me up. I just think kids bring a whole different dynamic to a story. They also bring a different level of depth to the characters. The characters in this were so fun. Beckett is the main male character. He can do no wrong. If you like acts of service, you will fall in love with this man. And then the children are just hoots. I love them. There's also a really cute dog. Oh my gosh, she is the best. She made me really jealous. I sent my dog to dog training after reading this book. That's not a lie. That's actually a true story. He's there right now. So anyways, this was a really, really cute book. Found family and like coming into fatherhood were two big tropes in this book, and just something I don't see very often. So very unique, a great time, definitely emotional. Get your tissues, but this is definitely worth the read. And then finally, I read Here One Moment for my local book club read for January. This was really, really good. This is definitely a book that talks about life and death. So the way I annotated was anything in blue is talking about death, anything in orange is talking about life. And so throughout this book, there's this big push and pull of what it means to live life to the fullest and make the most of the time you have left, but also how to go through periods of grief and mourning and loss. Definitely a thought-provoking book. I would recommend that people read this. I don't think it's one that I will reread, but it is one I'm glad I annotated so I can go back and read. This was a very, very long book. I definitely think it was a little bit longer than it needed to be, but as you read, you'll see that it is very descriptive, very beautiful writing, very philosophical in a lot of ways. And so if it had been shorter, the author wouldn't have been able to write in that format, and I think some of the meaning would have been lost on the audience. So for that reason, I think the length was appropriate, but also it makes it tough to want to reread a book like this. Here One Moment is basically about this flight in Australia, and everything is going well on this flight, and all of a sudden this woman stands up and starts pointing at people and saying, "I expect age of death, and reason for death. And she does this for every single person on the plane. So some people she predicts are going to pass away from old age at 103. Other people she predicts, you know, they're going to drown at 7 years old, or overdose at age 25, or pass away from a work accident at 41. There's such a wide variety here. And so she basically goes and predicts how everyone is going to die and when. And outside of getting her perspective, you see about 6 characters going through life after they get this prediction. Some of them believe it, some of them don't believe it. Some of them don't believe it, but their partners believe it, and so you get some dichotomy there. It's really, really interesting, a great commentary on life and what would you do with your life if you knew precisely how much time you would have left. Would you quit your job? Would you move with family? Would you divorce your partner? Would you have kids? Would you not have kids? Like, what would you do with your life if you knew exactly how much time you had left? I don't know. I just think it was such a great read for the start of the year. At book club, we all did vision boards after this, like just to look over our goals for the year, which was a lot of fun. We had a great conversation around this. This book also had a very good resolution, I thought. While it is very tense, like in the last 100 pages, you're like these people are coming up on their death date and it's intense and you're just like, when is it gonna happen? Like, when's the other shoe gonna drop? And you just get a lot of information throughout this book. Timelines come together and the resolution was really great. I enjoyed it. This was one I was like, I wonder how this is gonna wrap up. Like, is it a good story? And then is the ending gonna flop? Definitely think she had this thought through from the beginning, which I appreciated. This was a 4.5 star read for me. Definitely one I recommend, but make sure you're reading it in the right mindset and timing. Otherwise, it might be one that you DNF if you're in a little bit of a reading slump. Okay, those are the 6 books that I read in January, with the 2 honorable mentions of the ones that I started but didn't get around to finishing. It is currently just a couple days into February and I've already read 2 books, so definitely on a much better track for February and my reading goals. Again, if you want to check out my February TBR, I do have that posted. Some really great reads there. I'm super excited. If you have any book recommendations that you'd like to see on future videos or future TBR polls, let me know as well. I have literally almost a 200 book TBR, physical TBR. So odds are, if you recommend a popular book, I probably have it. Some of these books I just need convincing to read sooner than later. So please do that if you've read any of these and you see that I haven't read them. But thank you so much for watching. Again, this channel is relatively new, so please make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I do plan to be posting my 2025 reading journal pretty soon, as well as that Throne of Glass reread. So make sure you stay tuned for those. But other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful reading month and I'll see you next time. Love ya.